Thank you, and welcome back for the second day of EconCon 2023. We are excited to kick off today's programming by welcoming to the stage President and CEO of the Roosevelt Institute, Felicia Wong.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see you. So many old friends in the room, so many new faces. I'm just thrilled to be here. So it's EconCon 2023 in person, which is super great. I just want to thank Lindsay Owens and everyone at the Groundwork Collaborative, and of course, all of the hosts and co-hosts of which the Roosevelt Institute is proud to be named. But thank you so much, Lindsay, for bringing us together to discuss a progressive economic vision for our future. Today promises to remind all of us of what's at stake in the coming year and to be pretty inspirational because it is going to take all of us. We all need to coalesce around our vision for the economy, which is high care, low carbon, pro-democracy, and pro-equity. The last 2 years have been marked by a really promising shift in our approach to economic policy. It's not done yet. All of us know that, but I never thought we could see the kinds of changes today. 5 years ago, I never thought I'd see the kinds of changes today, right? Scale and structure of the American Rescue Plan. A progressive approach to industrial strategy in the Inflation Reduction Act, which means using the state to shape our markets and our economy, point us toward a green future. These are enormously big deals, and they have happened in this room. We've seen a good jobs-centered economic recovery. We've seen higher wages, we've seen more worker power, and we've seen all of that, especially for the people who are at the very bottom of the income distribution. We have shown that government can invest in a green energy supply chain. Very, very, very post-neoliberal of us. I hope you all are talking about post-neoliberalism all the time. I certainly do. So that is very post-neoliberal of us. And but as I said, it's not done. We must continue to be vigilant as we implement the IRA. I was just at Treasury the other day talking a lot about this. We're working on tax credits, structured tax credits. We really, really, really must make sure in our policy design that companies who are going to benefit from all of this federal money are going to do so in ways that are good for the public and good for workers, and in ways that engage communities democratically, even as we show that progressivism can build. So we aren't done, and the decisions that we make in the coming months are going to determine what our future for not just the next 2 years, but frankly the next multiple generations really looks like. Some people are reporting on the death of neoliberalism, but the path is not certain, and what replaces it remains to be contested, remains for us to contest. And as recently as the negotiations over the debt ceiling, we saw conservatives dial up the pressure, right? It was a really old playbook: budget cuts, austerity, racist narratives about who's deserving and who's not, anti-democratic approaches to governing. And I am really proud that our vision, the vision that we have built, offers a sharp contrast. We all know, as Franklin Roosevelt said, I'm contractually obliged to give you all a Roosevelt quote at this point, but we know, as FDR said, that government is not an alien power over us. Government is us. And to make that happen, we have to be in the government, we have to be pushing for a better government, and actually we have to defend government. And of course, a critical player in doing all of this, and a critical player in ensuring that debt ceiling negotiations would not undermine this vision, was the woman who I'm proud to introduce today, OMB Director Shalanda Young. So just a few words about her. Shalanda made history, of course, when she was confirmed in a very bipartisan vote in March 2022, becoming the first Black woman to lead OMB and part of the first all-female troika to run not just OMB, but also Treasury and the Council of Economic Advisors. Shalanda is, as you've seen in recent press, right? She is an excellent economic communicator. She always ties complicated issues back to real human experiences. You know, what I like about listening to her talk is that she often thinks about how she'd explain something to her grandmother who lives in a small town in Louisiana. So in addition to the debt limit deal, Shalanda is also, Director Young, sorry, is also largely responsible for both omnibus deals in this administration, as well as several appropriation deals in the last administration. And she is probably more responsible than anyone else for making sure that domestic discretionary investment is back up to reasonable levels and has been up to reasonable levels over the last 4 or 5 years. She knows more about the congressional budget process and the ins and outs of hundreds and hundreds of federal accounts than anyone else maybe on the planet, which is of course why she is the director of OMB. And as OMB director, she has enormous influence and responsibility for carrying out this president's agenda on everything from implementing all of the big Invest in America bills to regulations, to putting it all together into a unified and coherent plan. She has secured historic levels of funding for key national priorities, from vital assistance to Ukraine, to disaster relief for communities impacted by natural disasters, to critical investments in childcare, in education, in healthcare, and in climate. She is, as I said, a native of Southern Louisiana. She moved to DC almost 20 years ago to serve as a presidential management fellow at the National Institute of Health. She spent 14 years on the Hill, ultimately serving as staff director for the House Appropriations Committee. She has a master's from Tulane and a bachelor's from Loyola University New Orleans. She lives with her family, including her young daughter, in Washington, D.C. And Director Young, thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for reminding us that the civil service and all who serve in government are, in fact, the crown jewels of our democracy. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the stage today.
Hey, Sybil, how are you? It's like a little homecoming. I'm so glad to be with you. Thank you, Felicia, for those kind remarks. She talked about old friends. A lot of you are new friends to me, but over the last 2 years, I'm happy to have met a lot of you in this room through the work at OMB, and I see the imprints in the Biden administration and the policies for many of the things you've worked on for decades. And I hope you see those ideas come to the forefront with this president, this vice president. If you asked me 2 years ago, would I have spoken at EconCon? The answer would have been no. You have the practical part of the troika. I never thought I'd be somewhere where someone talked about troika. I call myself the practical one of the three. Where Janet teaches me all about bank regulations. I've gotten to learn about FDIC and supply side economics, and I kind of glaze over. And when I start talking about the appropriations process, she looks at me like I have 3 heads. But it is a really cool economic team. We welcome Jared into the fold, but he is messing up our full female vision here, but we love Jared. He's fitting in. He has a lot of good female energy. I think he'd be okay with me saying that. But it is great having a diverse economic team who can bring some of the practical Hill, how do we get our priorities done? How does the Hill think? And bring some of the thought process from people like Secretary Yellen, C.C. Rouse before Jared, and Lael now. Into reality. And I'm glad to serve as part of that team. We have lunch every week. It is a very collegial team, and I'm proud of that. And I think that comes forward too, and why you've seen a lot of accomplishments. It's really a team effort in the White House. I think it's important when we do these talks to remember where we started. Oftentimes we forget how bad it was when this president took office, facing a historic, not in a good way, pandemic affecting all of our lives. Nothing was normal. I hadn't seen friends and family for 2 years, many of you the same, experiencing an economic downturn, none like we've seen since the Great Depression, and a continued legacy of inequality, just shown bare because of the pandemic. But if you ask many of those people at the bottom of the ladder, this was no different than what they'd experienced their whole lives. More than 10 million Americans were unable to find work. Unemployment was over 6%, and millions of women were dropping out of the workforce during the pandemic. It was not a great time, but in the face of these challenges, the Biden-Harris administration came into office, got the pandemic under control. You know, I love when Republicans are like, the president shouldn't take credit for deficit reduction. Guess what? Had we not done ARP, had we not had a successful vaccine program, we would have continued to need the kind of resources for the American people because we would not be on the other side of the pandemic. So all of you who helped in that effort, thank you, because it was not a given that we would be in the place we are today with COVID. We cut child poverty in half. Help 200,000 child care providers, woohoo, keep their doors open and catalyze our nation's great recovery. Since then, and this president talks about this, remember it was called the Jobs and Families Plan? We've taken so many iterations. And it wasn't the Recovery Act, which I worked on when President Obama took over in the financial collapse. This was about coming out of the pandemic better than we went in. Taking one of those moments when your parents tell you, you can take a bad situation and make it better. Let's not just try to get out to the other side. Let's try to make it better. And this president has presided over a series of executive actions and legislative accomplishments that have continued to transform our economy. The bipartisan infrastructure law. How many infrastructure weeks did we have before we had a real infrastructure law? The CHIPS and Science Act, helping refuel resurgence in manufacturing. The historic Inflation Reduction Act, which many of you worked tirelessly on, and thank you. That is boosting clean energy, ensuring corporations pay a minimum tax, lowering energy bills, and finally, prescription drug costs coming down for the American people. These legislative accomplishments invest in American business, and they create good jobs in our country. Under this administration, the economy, who would have believed this, has created over 13 million jobs. That is all the jobs lost during the pandemic, plus 3 million. The unemployment rate has stayed under 4% for 16 months in a row. The last time our nation had such a long stretch of unemployment, I was not born. And looking out there, none of you were even close to being born. And to continue the historic progress we've made, the president put out his budget. We've been a little busy. On March 9th, earlier this year, it was built around 4 key values. First, giving families more breathing room. You hear the president talk about this. You know, from the other side, some of the rhetoric about working families, poor people in this country. I know a lot of them. I have family members that fall into that category. They don't ask for a handout. They need a little room. They need a shot. I certainly have been given a lot of lucky chances in my life, or I would not be in this spot. They are people and they're in the same position. They just need a little breathing room. Lowering prescription drug costs, lowering healthcare costs, lowering housing costs, lowering college costs, lowering childcare costs. We think those things in the budgets are economic engines. They get more people into the workplace. You want worker participation? Give parents childcare that's affordable. Second, the budget protects and strengthens Medicare and Social Security. Talked about the debt plan. You should not lose the fact that Medicare and Social Security were on the table. While they were shamed into taking it off, it was absolutely what they were gunning for at the beginning of this conversation. And thankfully, we were able to, in the very beginning, beat that back and save those important safety nets for our seniors in this country, those who rely on those programs and paid into them their entire lives. Third, our budget invests in America, boosting manufacturing, strengthening our national security, and cutting taxes for working families. And fourth, I think this team, we probably pull some ideas from, reduces the deficit by nearly $3 trillion over 10 years by asking the wealthiest people in this country and big corporations to begin to pay their fair share, and by cutting wasteful spending on special interests. We're interested in cutting spending. The oil and gas industry, $200 billion in profits at the end of last year, $30 billion in loopholes they get every year. Would you rather deal with that, or would you rather cut Head Start slots? I think you ask the American people, the choice is fairly simple. And I want to drill down on this point. The president often says in any serious conversation about fiscal responsibility, we've got to talk about revenue. You cannot say you're about fiscal responsibility and doing something about the debt without talking about revenue. Getting drawn into, even yesterday, I had an interviewer ask me, isn't the debt too high? Spending's got to get under control. Child care, block grants, Head Start did not get us into a debt problem. In contrast to the president's vision, we've seen what congressional Republicans think. They tried to threaten all the economic progress we made by holding this country's full faith and credit hostage. If our nation defaulted, it would have been the first time ever. And I don't think it's hyperbole or hype to say it would have unleashed economic destruction, not just in our country, but across the globe. Some estimates say 8 million Americans would have lost their jobs. Millions of Americans' retirement accounts would have been decimated. Our nation's credit rating would have been destroyed, which would have made everything from a car loan to government funding more expensive. And we would have been having a very different conversation today. I'm not sure we would be here today. We'd be busy trying to get out of that situation. So I'm glad we're able to come here with an affirmative message and keep the agenda going, because we were able to get over hostage taking and get to a deal. Thanks to the president's leadership and critical bipartisan compromise, we're in divided government. Whether we like it or not, it's certainly made my life a little more interesting these days. We were able to avert default and pass a budget agreement that protects our priorities. Look, when you're in those negotiations, it is very easy when people do not share your values. It is easy to walk away from the table, but you have to remember 8 million jobs are at risk. The same families we want to protect, and our investments would have been the first ones harmed by default. So failure was not an option. It was not easy. My sleep schedule is still recovering. My child is still surprised to see me at pickup. But it was worth it because we get to be here talking about an affirmative agenda and not how are we going to get out of this mess. But I had the privilege of working alongside some phenomenal negotiators on our side, Steve Ricchetti and Lael Brainerd, who I know a lot of you know, who really were a great team to work with. But I think you know my right and left-hand man, Michael Linden, who I can't believe I let go, but he and his wife, Rebecca, gave me an extra 3 weeks on the calendar to make sure default didn't happen, so I cannot complain. And if you all see Michael, you should know that he did not have a great time in his college reunion because he was on the phone with me and the rest of us trying to avoid default. So I owe him one or two. What we were not going to do in this negotiation is accept draconian cuts on the back of working families. As you know, the president said he also was not going to push an increased poverty in this country. And we had to deal with some very complex things. And thankfully, we were able to strike a bargain. While it would not be the bill any of us would have written, especially in unified government, I hope and I pray we did the best job we could to ameliorate the places we had to go and make sure that we had policies that did not increase poverty and live by the president's goal. And I think we've reached that. And again, you had to think, who are we trying to save? The same people targeted by Republicans in their just horrible policies would be the first people harmed in those job losses, in those loans being more expensive. So the bigger picture was always front of mind. Now, let me be clear. It was a compromise. Divided government is difficult. Elections matter. But we still stood strong and got a reasonable deal that prevented the worst outcome. Now, I know the panel will discuss more of these topics, but what I want to leave you with, and I know you're going to talk a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act, please don't think this deal came out without cuts to the climate programs, without a lot of scars. They want it. They're coming for it. We're able to save those things this time, but you should not rest because Republicans will not. One of their key goals, it became very clear in negotiation, was to go after the green credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. Not only to get rid of them, when that didn't work, their next idea was let's cap them. They're more expensive than CBO said. When have we ever changed the law because it didn't match the CBO score? New standards, we're not doing that. I think the Trump tax cuts are also more expensive. Maybe we should revisit that. But you all cannot rest, because I promise you, they are not done. And as the president pointed out many times to them, it's more expensive because it's working. And you can't have it, and hands off. So we're going to hold the line, and we're going to ask all of you for your help in holding the line. And I think Felicia talked about my 94-and-a-half-year-old grandmother, because on the front end, I talk about my daughter in months. When you get to your mid-90s, I also talk about in months. So she is 94 and a half. And every month is just a glorious thing to still have her with us. She is sharp as a tack, and she's kind of my focus group on how we talk about these things. Because one of the challenges is we have done a lot over 2 years, but how are we talking about it? Do regular people get all that has happened? Do they feel the 13 million jobs? Do they see the climate provisions making their lives better? Do they see the environmental justice things? Do they see, EPA coming into their communities? Do they feel it? And I think it's incumbent upon us and you to make sure people feel it. Because all these statistics are great, but if you can't tell my 94-and-a-half-year-old grandmother what these things mean and why she should care about it, we're not going to keep this progressive agenda going. So I task myself with that. I task you with that. And she's happy to talk to any of you on the phone. This is the same woman who told me in middle school to quit basketball. She was like, "You're okay, but maybe try something else." She was a very good basketball player and coach for 34 years. So she'll tell you the truth. So you let me know if you need a focus group. But it's incumbent upon us not to sit in these rooms and make sure we're communicating that these things really are impactful in regular people's lives. And Felicia, the greatest compliment you could have given me is that I speak, hopefully, in a way that regular folks can understand, because we kind of lost the battle if we don't get that part right. So thank you so much for all you do, and it was great to be with you today.